Welcome to Advanced TV Herstory. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams. This is the place where we connect the dots of TV and feminism to American culture and politics. These TV talk show episodes have been a lot of fun to research and produce. Invariably, I find myself going down a rabbit hole of something that a host did or that a guest said, and it's always fun, and I learn a lot. And I realize now that we only know half the picture because so many TV talk shows were lost to history. They were recorded on tape, and then the tape was recorded over, and then finally somebody said, we need the space, and they're gone. And then there are thousands, like literally thousands of TV episodes, TV talk shows, where, to put it delicately, they were boring. They were run-of-the-mill. Everyone behaved. No one went off their established talking points. They promoted whatever they were there to promote, and everybody sang well, and everybody went home. And the producers and the directors and the crew collected their paycheck, and they were happy. Is that any fun? I mean, sometimes the moment captured is the last time somebody very famous sang or was interviewed. That's kind of cool. But you know what? I'm going to talk today about Della Reese, because you're going to say, well, who's Della Reese? I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to tell you probably from the context that you might remember her. In the 1990s, she was in a very popular TV show on CBS called Touched by an Angel. She co-starred with Roma Downey, and she was on from 1994 to 2003. And so Roma Downey played a young angel who was just sort of beginning to get her angel wings, I guess you might say. And she was mentored by Della Reese, who kind of has an angel theme throughout her entire life. Touched by an Angel was not a favorite of the critics. Many of them called it kind of syrupy and melodramatic and sort of primetime chicken soup for the soul, if you want to take it back to a 90s reference. But on the other hand, it was on TV for almost 10 years. And today, when we think about melodramatic and sort of a feel good and just a warm sense that you get from how somebody tells a story, we have that feel good greeting card sort of storytelling of relationships. And that's called the Hallmark Channel movies. So, have people made that connection in the past? I don't know. I didn't really watch a whole lot of Touched by an Angel, but I have been fascinated by the life of Della Reese. Dial back the calendar another 20 years earlier, and you may remember Della Reese from a TV sitcom called Chico and the Man. It starred Freddie Prinze and Jack Albertson. So I bet you're wondering, why am I talking about Della Reese today with regard to talk shows? Because all I've told you about is a sitcom and a drama. I'll tell you. First, she made Herstory in 1969 when she got her own talk show called Della. It premiered for syndication, and it was developed out of her nightclub patter, the fact that she could sing and she could tell stories and she could have a good exchange with the audience and co-singers and all of it. Reese had already been on a number of talk shows and performing shows, both in the daytime and the evening, including Merv Griffin, Ed Sullivan, and Johnny Carson, just to name a few. And so Della's hour-long show featured singers and actors, and it was a top-flight orchestra, and it even had dancers. This was daytime, 60 minutes during the day. It was part sketch comedy, music, interviews. Her guests included Sarah Vaughan, Tony Bennett, Carmen McRae, Muhammad Ali, the Righteous Brothers, Kenny Rogers in his first TV appearance. This was 1969 and 1970. In short, Della Reese was the first Black woman to helm her own talk show, and she capably did so for 292 episodes. Now, I'll tell you this, if you go and research Della, Wikipedia is going to say it was 197, but Della wrote in her memoir 292. And she attributes its strongest audience, well, she explains her strongest audiences were in the South, but it was also shown in the North, Eastern Seaboard, other major markets. So 292 episodes, and the show's cancellation was probably likely due, at least in part, to the increased costs to produce a single episode. And it had gone up over those 2 years from $20,000 per episode to $85,000. So upon being told that her show was canceled, Reese recounted in her memoir which is entitled Angels Along the Way, My Life with Help from Above. She said this: "The news was disappointing, though not entirely unexpected. What really bothered me was one of the reasons their contact with their production company, that he had given for why he was unable to sell the show." Now, parenthetically, I will say that as a Black woman appearing on a daily show in the 1969, 1970s, I'm sure that her hair and her wardrobe expenses raised eyebrows from this whole group of men who were very accustomed to seeing the budget of what it cost to put Merv Griffin on or any other male talk show guy. It was a suit and maybe a toupee. But instead, you have to believe that like Dinah Shore's budget was probably very similar to what they were running on the Della Reese show. And if you think about it this way too, Dinah Shore and Della Reese, well, they had sets and they had costume changes and wardrobe changes, and they had cooking segments. They were basically a glorified variety show held during the day. Okay, you do variety show budgets, and they are a whole lot higher. So Della continues. This time, however, it was pretty blatant, she says. The reason he was simply unable to sell the show, he finally said, was because my gums were blue. Now, the guy who was with her producer, Woody Frazier, says, because her gums are blue? What does that even mean? And Della says, and I don't blame her, it means I'm Black. And she gestured to her producer and her director, and she shook her head, and she said, come on, let's get out of here. I got nothing. That had to have hurt. 10 years later, Chicago-based Oprah Winfrey put her own flourish to TV talk shows, and she eclipsed everybody, all the men, all the women, didn't matter your race or ethnicity. Oprah became the queen. But she wouldn't have gotten there, perhaps, without Della. Also, about 10 years later, an incident happened while taping an episode of The Tonight Show. Only instead of Johnny Carson, Richard Dawson was sitting in for Johnny. And as Della recounts in her memoir, I love this book, it came time for my second song, Pieces of Dreams. It's a fun, challenging way to sing a song. It's with only the emphasis on the bass as accompaniment. She talks about the melody and the rhythm, and they're all in that one instrument. So in order to pull this off as a singer, she said, you have to be able to hold your own. Naturally, I had to do it that way because it's what all the heavies did. And believe you me, I was one of the heavies. So, she continues the story, the bassist played a 4-bar intro and I began to sing. For the next 6 bars, I sang gloriously. And then, to my horror, I hit the worst note. It was the worst note I had ever sung in my life. My body began to twitch. Doc Severinsen saw me twitching violently and he thought I was dancing. But I could feel by now that I was about to fall down. So listeners, here is what she told Emmy TV Legends Foundation's interviews, which is available on YouTube.
When it happened, I didn't know what was wrong with me. I wasn't sick. I didn't have a cold. I was fine. In fact, I was going on a vacation with my husband, who was my fiance at the time. And I was happy as I could be. And the aneurysm ruptured in my brain. And I said, into your hands I commit my spirit. And I was out. And they took me across the street to the hospital. And they looked at me and looked at my size and decided that it must be something about the size I was that had made it happen. They didn't know what it was, but whatever had happened, they thought it had to do with my size. And so they took my vital signs and they were all good. And so they didn't know what was wrong with me. And so they sent me to another hospital. And they looked at me, and I was Black and an entertainer, and they decided that it must be an overdose of drugs. And so they started looking for drug content in my system. And there were no drugs. And so I wasn't too fat and I wasn't a junkie. So now nobody knew what was wrong with me. My son is a psychiatrist. He sent for my physician, who came immediately. And he said to them, I see her 3 times a year. She's not on drugs. And that's the size she is. And there must be something else we should be looking for. And so that night, they discovered that the aneurysm had ruptured. And the next morning, they sent me to another hospital because this other hospital had the equipment necessary to deal with an aneurysm in my brain. And they then took x-rays and stuff and things. And after 2 weeks, they sent me to London, Ontario, to Dr. Charles Drake. I had surgery, brain surgery, twice in 10 days. And 10 days after that, I was doing a commercial for Campbell's Soup.
As medical emergencies on TV talk shows go, Della's incident doesn't compare to Wendy Williams fainting on her own show because The Tonight Show was taped, and likely Della's segment before she collapsed never aired. However, Wendy Williams' show was live. It was that Halloween episode about 10 years or so ago in which Wendy was dressed as a Statue of Liberty. And early in the show, she was talking, engaging with the audience. And then she got this blank look on her face. And then she just dropped. And we would learn days later of her diagnosis of Graves' disease. And unfortunately, Wendy's health continues to suffer. And we certainly wish her well. This rabbit hole about talk shows brought me and you a firsthand account of how a Black celebrity received emergency health care in California 44 years ago. I ask you, how far have we come? So, listeners, we've never talked about this, but I am not a super religious person. But I do know my own values and my ethical standards, and I hold my friends and my family to them, and they to me. I liked Reese's memoir, Angels Along the Way, My Life with Help from Above, published in 1997, because it stands out as a solid celebrity book for a few key reasons. First, I give Della Reese a lot of credit. She was candid. She wrote of racism that she encountered on the road as a singer, of ending violent relationships with men, of finding out her lawyers and her accountant both stole from her and left her with a big bill to the IRS for unpaid taxes over the course of many years. That takes candor and a certain sense of confidence. Second, she explains her spirituality and its role in her life. This is somebody who grew up in a very religious environment. Goodness, when you read this book, you find out that she survived rising up out of poverty and that she experienced domestic violence and this aneurysm and crashing through a sliding glass door and recovering. She espouses positivity and confidence and yet eloquently describes that her rock is this solid belief in a higher power. I respect that. Her memoir is filled with reflection. One could say her life was filled with reflection. Her upbringing in the church and singing gospel made her a very good judge of character and actions. And so whenever what would seem like a random event happened that you or I might disregard, she ended up reflecting it as though it was a moment that changed her life because of these angels. Her belief is not in superpowers, but rather that these moments and these people, these angels, created windows for more good things to happen. And she does a lot of talk about doors opening and closing. That's what we all do, right? But rather, she described them as life transitions and opportunities that were windows, that they require more attention to be paid because they are smaller and that their details might be obscured unless you are ready to fit them into your aspirations and your dreams and your goals. And when she found herself in a good position, she recognized she had the power to create windows and opportunities for others. Della Reese was not a big name dropper, but I'll tell you that when she does, hello, Mahalia Jackson and Ethel Waters are two of the biggest ones. So, background, as a teenager, Della Reese sang backup for Mahalia Jackson's summer tours. And in fact, Jackson had to school Della a bit, who was from Detroit, when they went into the South, because Della was assuming that during the difficult 50s, that life in Detroit was the same as life in the South. And in fact, there were, separate drinking fountains, separate entrances for restaurants. You couldn't get served or stay in a hotel that you were necessarily performing in or a venue that you were performing in. And that's what Jackson had to teach Della Reese. Ethel Waters, oh my gosh, Della carefully tracked Ethel's career. And it was a significant career in the 40s and early 50s. And ultimately, Della repaid the fanhood, the girl fan that she had come to be of Ethel Waters by having her on her talk show. And Ethel, at that point, fairly long in her career and not very popular, not really visible much, was absolutely flattered to pieces. And Della just recounts it in such a meaningful way. She met scads of people throughout her life, but in this book, she only names the names that mattered to her. And when she mentions them, she does so with gratitude, and she talks about how they influenced her. So again, her career, because yes, Touched by an Angel, and yes, Chico and the Man, and Della the talk show, but she had worked continuously from the 1960s through the 2000s. She was on these other talk shows, variety shows, game shows like the Hollywood Squares, of course, dramas and sitcoms. She was nominated for Emmys for Touched by an Angel, but she never won one. But the NAACP Image Awards absolutely recognized her talent. So she won the Leading Actress Award in 1995, 96, 97, 98, 99, 2000, and 2002. Before that, yes, as I mentioned, she had gotten her start singing gospel in the Detroit area. By the time she was 17 and already off of Mahalia Jackson's tour, she ventured out on her own and made her way to New York. She sang in clubs. She recorded a lot. There are albums by Della Reese. And she credits her faith the entire time with guiding her through many, many difficult times, getting her out of poverty because she thought she was put on this earth to do right by others, to help others. She is just so cool. I love this book. This is a great book. This is actually from the Hennepin County Library System in Minneapolis, Minnesota. My last note on Della's memoir is that it was intimate. She shared not just this recounting of her own near-death experience after the Johnny Carson taping, but she wrote of holding people's hands as they edged near their deaths due to AIDS and cancer and heart failure. Again, Della Reese walked her angel talk, and she did so with warmth and love. I respect anyone who willingly steps up to help others in this special way. If that's you or someone you help others, then bless you and your network. You're why I podcast, and I hope you'll spend a few hours with Della's memoir. Maybe she really was an angel. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams. Listeners, a reminder for you to get all the news about this podcast that never gets posted to social media. Subscribe to our newsletter at tvherstory.com. And as always, many, many thanks to audio editor Mary Lou Morose and video editor Nivea Lopez for their guidance in improving the sound and audio produced in my basement office. Yes, this is where I am. Our music is Jazzer's Take Me Higher, found at freemusicarchive.org. And the audio clip is pulled from Foundation Interviews Emmy Legends channel on YouTube. Check out all the links in the show notes. Lastly, my many thanks to you for listening.